Ava Daniels stood at the back of the operations room, her hands steady as she checked the inventory logs. The noise of the bustling soldiers around her barely registered in her mind. She had perfected the art of being invisible. The smaller her frame, the less attention she attracted. It was a strategy she had used for years, but it hadn't come without its cost. She had traded the spotlight for a quiet, unnoticed life, one that shielded her from the ghosts of her past. Her faded tattoo, hidden under her sleeve, was the only piece of her old life that remained visible to anyone who cared to look closely. It was geometric, an intricate design in silver ink. Most people dismissed it as abstract art or the insignia of some forgotten band. But for those who knew, it meant something far more dangerous. The recruits at Fort Solace had their own theories. Eli, a bright-eyed soldier fresh from training, once joked that Ava must have been some kind of artist before she ended up here. A few others guessed she had been a barista. The laughter came in hushed voices, never directed at her. They didn't know that her tattoo symbolized something far darker than a fleeting trend. They didn't know that she had once been part of an elite military unit that carried out operations so secret they were erased from history. The Omega Force had been trained to handle missions that no one should ever know about. And Ava had been one of them. Ava didn't respond to the jokes or mockery. She simply went on with her work, moving with the quiet efficiency of someone who had long ago learned the value of blending in. But every now and then, someone, usually a sergeant, would make a comment that made her tense, ever so slightly. The memory of her past haunted her, always just beneath the surface, never fully gone. Lieutenant Colonel Isaac Graves was one of the few who noticed things others missed. A 20-year veteran, he was skilled at reading people, and something about Ava didn't add up. Her file was filled with redacted information, her previous employment listed as classified, and her medical history sealed. It was the kind of thing that set off alarm bells in a man like him. One afternoon, while watching Ava through his office window, Graves saw her sitting in the training yard, dismantling a rifle with the practiced ease of someone who had done it thousands of times before. The young recruits gathered around her, curious. One of them, Private Johnson, called out in his usual cocky manner, "Hey, logistics lady, what are you doing with that scope?" "Playing with toys." Ava didn't even look up. She continued to check the calibration, making adjustments that seemed almost choreographed, as though her fingers moved of their own accord. A silence hung in the air, broken only by the distant sound of drill commands. But then, something unusual happened. The base's facial recognition system was activated, zooming in on Ava's face. Graves didn't know why it did this. After all, she was just a logistics officer. But when the system glitched, showing profile not found, access denied, Graves' curiosity grew stronger. The failure of the system triggered a classified alert. Something about Ava didn't fit. She wasn't just a logistics coordinator. His suspicion deepened when the IT office flagged her tattoo, an Omega class tattoo. The alert read, "Omega class, classified, access denied. Report to clearance level 7 immediately." A chill ran down Graves' spine. He had heard whispers about Omega Force over the years, ghost stories told in dark corners of military bars. But he never thought they were real. Now, staring at the alert on his screen, Graves wasn't so sure. The next day, Graves' mind was preoccupied. His office felt unnaturally quiet, the hum of the air conditioning louder than usual as he stared at the screen, replaying the glitch in his mind. He couldn't shake the feeling that something about Ava wasn't just strange, it was dangerous. As he sat in his office, trying to piece together the scattered information, a soft knock at the door broke his concentration. "Sir," a voice called out. It was Specialist Tom Brooks, the base's tech expert. Brooks looked unsettled, his face pale, as though he had just seen something he wasn't supposed to. "What is it, Brooks?" Graves asked, his voice low and steady, betraying none of the curiosity he felt inside. Brooks stepped inside, holding up a report in his hands. "I ran a more thorough scan on that tattoo. It's not just a normal Omega tattoo. It's classified Omega class, to be specific. I try to dig deeper, but everything leads to dead ends. There's no official record of it. It's as though someone erased her completely. But then, when I try to pull up her history, The whole system locked me out. Graves leaned forward, the weight of what Brooks was saying sinking in. You're telling me she's not just an ordinary soldier? She's one of them. Brooks nodded. I don't know how to explain it. All I know is that when I tried to access her file, the system wouldn't let me. I've never seen anything like it. Graves' instincts told him to dig deeper. But that same instinct warned him to proceed carefully. If Ava was indeed a part of Omega Force, she had likely seen things that most people couldn't even imagine, and that made her more dangerous than any enemy Graves had faced in his career. The day passed in a blur. Graves couldn't focus on anything else. Every time he looked out his office window, he found himself watching Ava. She moved like a shadow, always in the background, always unnoticed by the rest of the base. But Graves couldn't stop noticing her. There was something about the way she moved, the way she carried herself, that made his skin crawl. It wasn't just the precision with which she did her job. It was the eerie calmness she exuded, like a predator waiting to pounce. He had to know more. Later that evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Graves found himself walking through the darkened corridors of Fort Solace. He was headed to the training yard again, where Ava had been earlier that day, working on a rifle scope. His steps were deliberate, each one echoing in the silence of the empty base. He wasn't sure why he was drawn to her, but something about her felt off, like an unsolved mystery waiting to be unraveled. As Graves approached the yard, he saw her silhouette in the distance, sitting alone on a bench. Ava was always alone. She preferred it that way. But tonight there was something different in the air. The night seemed heavier, the silence thicker. Colonel Graves. Ava's voice cut through the stillness before Graves could even reach her. She didn't look up, didn't acknowledge him directly, but the tone of her voice made it clear she knew he was there. Graves stopped a few feet away, studying her from a distance. You always seem to be the one that gets the quiet shifts, he said, keeping his tone casual. Ava finally looked up, her sharp eyes meeting his. I find peace in the quiet. It helps me focus. Graves took a slow step forward. Focus on what exactly? Logistics? He couldn't help but test her, pushing just a little to see if she'd crack. Ava stood, folding her arms across her chest. I focus on the work that needs to be done, Colonel. Nothing more, nothing less. There was a brief pause as they locked eyes, the air between them thick with unspoken tension. Graves felt like she was daring him to say something more, to dig deeper, but part of him was afraid to go too far. He wasn't sure what kind of person he was dealing with, but one thing was certain. Ava Daniels wasn't just a logistics officer. I know what you are, Graves said, his voice suddenly taking on a heavier tone. I've seen your file. Or rather, what's left of it. Ava's expression didn't change, but her eyes narrowed just slightly. I'm not the person you think I am, Colonel, she replied, her voice steady, but Graves could hear the edge of something more beneath the calm. Graves took another step forward, his voice lowering. Who are you then? Who were you? Ava hesitated for a moment before answering. I was someone who did what needed to be done, and I am still that person. She paused, her gaze never leaving his. But that's not who I am here. Here I fix things. I keep things running. Graves studied her closely, wondering just how much of the truth she was hiding, and how much she had buried. And if someone were to dig deeper, what would they find? Ava, what's your real story? Her eyes flashed, just for a moment, a sharpness there that sent a chill down Graves' spine. Some stories are better left untold, she said softly, her voice almost a whisper. He had pushed too far. Graves took a step back, realizing that he had reached the limit of what she was willing to reveal. But in that moment, something in Ava's gaze made him question everything. Was she truly just a logistics officer? Or was she a time bomb waiting to go off, one that no one would be able to stop once it started? I don't know who you really are, Ava, Graves muttered, almost to himself. Ava's gaze softened slightly, as though the weight of his words had landed somewhere deep inside her. Maybe it's better that way, she replied, turning and walking away from him without another word. Graves watched her leave, a sense of unease settling deep in his chest. He couldn't shake the feeling that he was standing at the edge of something far darker than he had ever imagined. And Ava Daniels, who had spent so many years hiding in plain sight, was the key to everything. He had to know more. There was no turning back now. The days that followed were filled with an uneasy tension. Graves couldn't stop thinking about Ava. He found himself watching her more closely, noticing the smallest of details, how her eyes darted to every exit when she entered a room, how she always sat with her back to a wall, her careful movements that hinted at years of training, years of surviving under pressure. She was always calm, always in control, and yet there was something more, something lurking beneath her exterior. Graves had seen the signs before, soldiers who had seen too much, who had been broken and rebuilt, hardened by the things they had been forced to do. Ava had the look of someone who had walked through hell and come out the other side, scarred but not defeated. She was a ghost that had managed to disappear in plain sight. He couldn't let it go. His curiosity had become an obsession. Graves started to dig into every corner of Fort Solace, hoping to uncover something, anything, that might explain who Ava really was. He enlisted the help of Brooks, the IT specialist, to run more detailed scans on her, trying to access any trace of her past. But every time, they hit a dead end. The files on Ava were more restricted than anyone's he had ever seen. One afternoon, as Graves sat in his office, poring over the latest report on her, a knock at the door pulled him from his thoughts. It was Samantha Wells, a senior officer who had worked with Graves on several high-priority operations. She was one of the few people Graves trusted, but even she had been distant lately. She didn't look as composed as usual. There was something in her eyes, a flicker of concern, of uncertainty. "Colonel," Samantha said, her voice tight. "We need to talk." Graves motioned for her to sit, his mind immediately shifting to the worst possible scenario. "What's going on, Samantha?" She looked around the room, her gaze scanning for any sign of eavesdropping. "It's about Ava Daniels," she said, lowering her voice. "She's not who you think she is." Graves' heart skipped a beat. He had known it all along. "I know. She's part of Omega Force." Samantha's face didn't betray any surprise. Instead, she sighed heavily and leaned forward. "I was part of Omega Force, too," she said quietly. "Not in the same unit as her, but I know the kind of work they did. And I know what happens when someone like her comes back into the fold." Graves frowned, unsure of where this conversation was headed. "What do you mean?" Samantha's gaze softened, but there was still that edge of caution in her eyes. Ava was one of the best, a highly trained operative who could get into any place and out again without a trace. She was a ghost, just like the rest of us. But it wasn't a choice. None of us chose this life. We were made for it. And when she left, when she disappeared, it wasn't to escape. It was to survive. Graves couldn't wrap his head around it. "She's hiding from something?" Samantha nodded. "She's hiding from everything. She knows that the things she did for Omega Force can never be forgiven. And she knows that people like her, they don't just fade away. They're hunted." Graves leaned back in his chair, trying to process this new information. "Hunted by who?" "By everyone," Samantha said softly. "By the people we worked for. By the ones we betrayed. By anyone who has something to gain from destroying us. The Omega Force was a tool. And when a tool becomes useless, it gets discarded, or worse, eliminated." A chill ran down Graves' spine. He had seen the look in Ava's eyes the night they spoke in the training yard. There was a pain there, a deep, gnawing pain that spoke of years of secrets and sacrifice. He had thought he could see through her, thought he could break down the wall she'd built. But now, he realized he had barely scratched the surface. "The tattoo," Graves said, almost to himself. "It's not just a mark of who she was. It's a target." Samantha didn't answer right away, but the tension in the room thickened as she processed his words. "Yes, that tattoo marks her as one of the last. The last of Omega Force. There aren't many of us left, Graves. Some of us died on the field. Some of us disappeared. But others, like Ava, they still have a bounty on their heads." "A bounty?" Graves' voice hardened with disbelief. "Who'll want her dead?" "Victor Kane," Samantha replied, her voice quiet. "He's the one who's been hunting the survivors. He's tied to the people we worked for. He's dangerous, and he's relentless. He's got resources, and he's got connections. Ava's been running from him for years." Graves' thoughts raced. The name Victor Kane was one he recognized from his own time in the field. He had heard rumors about the Mercenary, about how he'd built an empire of violence on the backs of people like Ava. But he never thought it would be someone like her that Kane was after. "What do we do?" Graves asked, his voice growing more urgent. "How do we protect her?" Samantha's face grew hard. "You can't protect her. Not from Kane. No one can." She paused, her eyes locking with his. "But you can keep her alive. For now." Graves leaned forward, his fists clenching on the desk. "Tell me how." "We have to get her out," Samantha said, her voice low. "We can't let Kane get to her first. He'll tear this base apart looking for her. The only way to keep her safe is to move her before he does." Graves nodded, his mind already calculating the steps. But as he did, another thought struck him. What if she doesn't want to leave? What if she wants to stay and face him? Samantha's eyes softened with understanding. "She won't stay if she knows it will put everyone here at risk. Ava doesn't want anyone else involved in her fight. She's lived with that weight for too long." But Graves knew better. He knew that Ava's fight wasn't just her own. It was bigger than that, and he wasn't about to let her face it alone. The decision was made. Graves stood up, determination set in his eyes. "Then we move fast. We need to find her before Kane does." As he left his office, Samantha followed, her face hard with resolve. Ava had always been a ghost to them all. But now, the time had come to find her, to protect her, and to uncover the truth about who she really was. But deep down, Graves knew that this was just the beginning. Whoever controlled Ava's past, whoever controlled Omega Force, was not going to let her go without a fight. And the coming storm would test everyone at Fort Solace in ways they couldn't even begin to understand. The following evening, the shadows of Fort Solace grew long as Graves and Samantha made their way through the corridors. Graves was no longer the man he had been when he first stepped onto this base. The person he was now, determined, cautious, and brimming with purpose, was a far cry from the soldier who had once commanded with ease, confident that he could handle anything. But that confidence had been shaken when he realized just how much he didn't know about the woman he had trusted to keep the base running smoothly. Graves had no illusions anymore. Ava Daniels wasn't just a logistics officer. She was a soldier, a highly trained operative who had seen and done things that could break a man. Her tattoo was a reminder of everything she had left behind and everything that was hunting her. The only question now was whether he would be able to protect her from the storm that was about to hit Fort Solace. Graves stopped just outside the operations room, his hand pausing at the doorframe. Inside, Ava was working, her head down, completely focused on a set of orders she was preparing for shipment. She looked peaceful, like nothing was wrong, but Graves knew that was all a front. Beneath her calm exterior was a woman who was on the run from a past that refused to stay buried. Samantha stepped closer, her eyes narrowing as she surveyed the scene. "She won't leave willingly, you know that, right?" she asked, her voice a mixture of caution and concern. Graves didn't answer immediately, his gaze lingering on Ava as she worked, her movements measured and precise. "She won't leave. Not until she knows it's the only choice she has." Samantha let out a low sigh, her hand brushing against the doorframe, as if to steady herself. "You know what happens when she gets cornered. She'll fight. She won't go without a fight." Graves clenched his jaw. "I don't want it to come to that." Inside the room, Ava didn't seem to notice them watching her. The faint hum of the base's systems was the only sound as Graves finally pushed the door open. Samantha followed, keeping her distance as Graves approached Ava. "Ava," Graves said, his voice calm, but carrying the weight of something unsaid. Ava looked up, her eyes quickly scanning his face. She didn't seem surprised to see him. Instead, there was an almost imperceptible tightening in her shoulders, as if she knew what was coming but had been waiting for it anyway. "Colonel," she said, her voice neutral. "Something I can do for you?" Graves held her gaze for a moment longer than necessary before speaking. "We need to talk." Ava's fingers paused on the paperwork in front of her, but she didn't flinch. "About what?" Graves took a breath. "About you. And your past." Ava's eyes narrowed, but she didn't retreat. Her posture remained unchanged, but there was an undeniable shift in the air. "I told you before, Colonel. I don't talk about my past." Samantha moved into the room, leaning against the desk and crossing her arms over her chest. Ava, you don't get to choose anymore. It's not just your past that's in danger now. It's everyone on this base. The silence between them stretched taut, every word hanging heavy in the air. Ava's gaze shifted between Graves and Samantha, weighing her options. She knew what was coming. She had felt it in the air ever since Graves' investigation into her had begun. But hearing it spoken out loud, that she couldn't escape it, that her past was going to consume her present, made it feel real in a way she hadn't been prepared for. I'm not here to ask about the past, Ava, Graves said, his voice steady, but his words carrying the weight of urgency. I'm here to protect you, and to protect everyone here. We know about Omega Force. We know what's at stake. Ava didn't flinch. She'd heard these words before, but the way Graves said it made her realize that the walls she had so carefully built were starting to crack. Her life, the one she had worked so hard to bury, was being dragged back into the light, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. I'm not running anymore, she said softly. The words were simple, but they carried the power of someone who had been running for far too long. Ava pushed away from the desk and walked toward the window, her back to them. And I'm not asking for help. Graves stepped forward. You don't have a choice. Kane's coming, Ava, and when he does, it won't just be you he's after. He'll take this whole place down to get to you. For a moment, Ava was silent. She stared out at the darkened horizon, the quiet hum of the base all around her. I don't want to put anyone at risk. That's why I've been hiding all these years. I know, Graves replied, his voice softer now, his tone understanding. But running from this won't keep you safe. Kane has people everywhere. He won't stop until he finds you. Ava turned slowly, her eyes filled with a mixture of fear and something else, something darker, a recognition of the truth in Graves' words. She looked at him, then at Samantha, who was watching her with the same quiet determination. I can't run anymore, she whispered, but I won't go down without a fight. Graves met her gaze, his expression unwavering. Then let's make sure you're not fighting alone. The next few hours passed in a blur of activity. Graves and Samantha worked together, gathering supplies, strategizing, and alerting key personnel on the base. Ava stood to the side, watching them work with the intensity of someone who had been in the shadows for too long. She knew what was coming, and for the first time, she allowed herself to feel something she hadn't felt in years: hope. But as the night wore on, the unease that had been simmering beneath the surface began to grow. Graves couldn't shake the feeling that they were running out of time. Kane was close, and they had to act fast. The final preparations were made, and Ava stood at the door of the operations room, her tactical gear now fully in place. It had been years since she had donned the uniform of Omega Force, but now it felt like the only thing that could protect her, the only thing that could keep those around her safe. We move at dawn, Graves said, his voice a calm command. Ava, you lead. You know the way. We'll follow. Ava's lips curled into a small, almost imperceptible smile. It wasn't a smile of happiness, but one of resolve. She had faced impossible odds before, and she had survived. But this time, she wasn't alone. As the first light of dawn crept over the horizon, Ava led the team out of the base, her eyes scanning the surroundings with the practiced vigilance of a seasoned operative. Graves, Samantha, and the rest of the team followed, their faces determined but tense. In the distance, the sound of engines rumbled on the wind. Ava didn't look back. She couldn't afford to. This wasn't just her fight anymore. It was everyone's fight, and as long as they were together, they had a chance. But the storm that was about to hit Fort Solace would change everything. Ava's past had finally caught up with her, and the cost of survival was higher than she could have ever imagined. The first rays of dawn sliced through the dark sky, casting long shadows over the barren landscape that stretched beyond Fort Solace. Ava led the team forward, her boots crunching against the dirt with each step. Graves and Samantha followed, their expressions hard, their eyes sharp, as though the air itself was thick with tension. Ava kept her head low, scanning the horizon, feeling the familiar weight of danger pressing down on her chest. She had been here before, out in the field, running reconnaissance, moving with the precision of a predator. The difference now was that she wasn't alone, and that made her feel more vulnerable than she had in years. Ava glanced back at the team. Graves was directly behind her, his face set in grim determination. Samantha, ever the professional, was close by, her eyes darting around, alert to every sound, every movement. The other soldiers followed in formation, trying to keep pace with her calculated steps. None of them seemed to fully grasp what they were about to walk into. Ava knew the truth. They were walking straight into the lion's den. They reached the edge of the base, the last line of defense, where the outer perimeter was now visible in the distance. The roads that led out of Fort Solace were abandoned, eerily quiet, and Ava couldn't shake the sense of impending doom hanging over them. She had trained for moments like this, facing down an enemy with no reinforcements, no backup, but this felt different. The weight of the past was heavier now, and the shadows of her former life seemed to follow her like a dark cloud. As they continued to move, the distant rumble of engines began to grow louder. Ava's heart quickened, but she maintained her pace, not allowing the slightest flicker of concern to show on her face. She had to remain calm. She had to keep them focused. Graves noticed the change in her posture, the way her shoulders tensed as they neared the outskirts of the base. "How much further?" Graves asked in a low voice, keeping his tone steady. Ava didn't break her stride. "Not far, but we need to stay sharp. Kane's people are close." Graves nodded, his hand instinctively resting on the sidearm at his waist. They had no idea how many mercenaries Kane had dispatched to track her down, but they knew one thing for sure. Kane wouldn't send amateurs to do his dirty work. These were trained professionals, and they were coming for her. And that meant anyone caught in the crossfire wouldn't make it out alive. Ava's mind raced, recalling her previous encounters with Victor Kane's mercenaries. They were ruthless, efficient, and utterly merciless. She had spent years evading them, slipping through their fingers time and time again. But now they were closing in. She didn't have the luxury of time. The team had to be ready for anything. Without warning, the sound of vehicles grew louder. Ava's eyes darted to the side, and her instincts kicked in. "Get down," she hissed, dropping to the ground and pulling Graves with her. The team followed suit, pressing their bodies against the dirt as the low hum of engines reached a fever pitch. From behind the ridge, the first vehicle appeared. It was a black armored truck, its windows tinted so dark that no one could see inside. It rolled past them, the engine's growl vibrating the ground beneath them. Ava held her breath, motioning for the team to stay still, to remain hidden. The truck passed by without noticing them. No one had seen them in the brush. But Ava knew it was just the beginning. Kane's forces were here, and they wouldn't stop until they found her. "Stay low," Ava whispered. "They're moving into position." Graves nodded, his gaze fixed on the truck as it disappeared from view. He didn't like this. The enemy was already ahead of them. They were getting too close, too fast. "We need to move," Samantha said urgently, scanning the area. "If they're moving in from all sides, we can't stay here." Ava nodded, already calculating the best route for escape. The perimeter ahead was their only way out, but it was heavily guarded. Ava's mind whirred as she mentally mapped out their approach. "Follow me. We'll take the long route. Keep low, stay out of sight. We can't afford to be detected." With practiced precision, Ava led them away from the path, toward the trees on the far side. The group moved swiftly, the air thick with tension. Every rustle of the leaves, every snap of a twig underfoot seemed louder than usual, and Ava felt the familiar rush of adrenaline surging through her veins. This was it. They were in enemy territory now. As they neared the tree line, the sound of another vehicle came into earshot, this time closer than before. Ava motioned for them to stop, her heart racing. She couldn't afford to make a mistake. They were exposed, and they had no choice but to wait for the vehicle to pass. The seconds felt like minutes, but the vehicle finally slowed down, the engine dying as it came to a halt just a few yards away. Ava's eyes scanned the area, looking for any sign of movement. The tension in the air was suffocating. She could almost feel the eyes of the mercenaries on them, as if they were being watched by unseen eyes. The mercenaries were everywhere, but Ava couldn't afford to panic. They had to move, and they had to move now. "Now," she whispered. In a fluid motion, they sprinted toward the tree line, keeping low and silent. The mercenaries in the vehicle didn't see them. They had slipped through the cracks, just like Ava had always done before. But this wasn't over. They were just getting started. As they pushed forward, Graves couldn't help but feel the weight of the situation. The further they moved from the base, the more exposed they became. But this was the only chance they had. They had to get to the extraction point. They had to get Ava out of here. After several tense minutes, Ava held up her hand, signaling for the team to stop. They had reached the outer perimeter, and Ava was already scanning the area. Her mind was working overtime, calculating every possible route of escape. The sound of approaching vehicles grew louder, and Ava's heart raced. They were running out of time. Suddenly, the bushes to their right rustled, and Ava's instincts kicked in. "Move!" she shouted, just as the first shot rang out. The crack of gunfire echoed through the dense forest, breaking the tense silence that had surrounded them. Ava's instincts took over as she pulled Graves to the ground, just narrowly avoiding a bullet that whizzed past them. The team scattered into the underbrush, diving for cover as the sound of more shots rang out, sharp and purposeful. It was clear now. Kane's forces had found them. They weren't here to negotiate. They weren't here to scare them off. They were here to kill. Ava's pulse raced, but her mind stayed sharp. She had been in these situations before, but this time it was different. She wasn't alone. These men and women weren't just soldiers following orders. They were her responsibility now. And that responsibility weighed heavier than any mission she had ever been assigned. "Stay low and move fast," she barked at the team, her voice steady even as the adrenaline surged through her veins. "We have to get to the extraction point. Now." Graves was the first to recover, pulling himself up from the dirt with military precision. He fired a few quick shots toward the source of the attack, his rounds finding their mark in the trees. The mercenaries were using the terrain to their advantage, taking cover behind rocks and trees, but they hadn't expected a counterattack this soon. "Cover me," Graves shouted, moving toward the left side, his movements swift but deliberate. Ava didn't hesitate. She sprinted toward the right, her eyes scanning the trees for any sign of movement. The sound of gunfire filled the air, and every step felt like an eternity. Her training kicked in, guiding her with precision as she ducked behind a large boulder out of view of the enemy. Samantha was close behind, taking cover beside her. "We got to make it to that ridge," Samantha said, pointing toward a higher ground just up ahead. "We'll have the high ground advantage." Ava's eyes narrowed as she surveyed their surroundings. Not without getting flanked. They're too spread out. She took a deep breath, pushing the exhaustion from her mind. "We'll have to force our way through. You cover the right. I'll handle the left." Samantha nodded, her rifle raised, her fingers steady on the trigger. "Got it." Ava moved first, her feet pounding against the dirt as she broke cover and sprinted toward the next boulder. Another shot rang out, but Ava was already gone, disappearing into the shadows of the trees. She didn't look back. She couldn't afford to. Not now. The mercenaries were trying to herd them, pushing them toward the open field. Ava's heart pounded in her chest, but she kept her cool, assessing her options. Her eyes locked onto the distant ridge, and she knew it was their only chance. She signaled for Graves to fall back toward the left side, while Samantha covered their right. The mercenaries weren't expecting this kind of resistance, especially not from someone like her. Graves followed the command without question, his movements calculated and precise. He was a good soldier, but even he could see the situation wasn't looking good. They were outgunned, outnumbered, and running out of time. His mind raced, but he didn't falter. If anyone could get them out of this, it was Ava. They made it to the ridge, but as they crested the top, Ava felt her stomach drop. More mercenaries were waiting for them on the other side, their weapons aimed at the team. They had been cut off, trapped. Ava's mind worked quickly. She looked around, searching for a way out. The ridge was steep, and the surrounding area was too open. The enemy was closing in, and every escape route was blocked. But then she saw it, a narrow path cutting through the trees just to the left of the ridge. It was barely visible, hidden by thick underbrush, but it was their only shot. Down that path, Ava ordered, her voice sharp as she signaled for the team to move. They didn't hesitate. Graves and Samantha took the lead, quickly pushing through the dense foliage. Ava brought up the rear, her eyes darting between the enemy and her team, her heart hammering in her chest. They needed to keep moving, and they needed to keep quiet. Every step felt like it could be their last. But as they moved deeper into the forest, Ava's senses heightened. The silence that had followed them was unsettling. The mercenaries were closing in, but they weren't firing. They weren't rushing them. It was as if they were waiting for something. Ava felt a chill run down her spine, the hairs on the back of her neck standing on end. She knew something was coming. They were being herded, led straight into a trap. "Stay close," Ava murmured, her voice barely above a whisper. "They're playing with us." Graves and Samantha exchanged a look, but they didn't question her. They trusted her. They had no choice but to. Suddenly, the sound of vehicles revving up came from behind them. Ava's head snapped around as she heard the distant roar of engines. It wasn't just one vehicle. It was a convoy, and it was closing in fast. "They're bringing in reinforcements," Samantha said, her voice tense. "We won't make it to the extraction point in time." Ava's mind raced. She needed to get them out, but the path ahead was becoming more and more dangerous. The forest was too dense for vehicles to follow, but the mercenaries had other ways of tracking them. Ava could feel their presence like a shadow lurking just behind them, never quite within reach, but always there. "Move!" Ava shouted, pushing forward with renewed urgency. "We need to get to the high ground." The team picked up their pace, running faster, the sound of their footsteps muffled by the thick underbrush. The trees were dense, but Ava knew the terrain well. She knew the way. She had memorized every ridge, every path, every escape route over the years. As they reached the clearing, Ava saw it, the helicopter. The extraction was almost here, but it was too far. She had to buy them time. The mercenaries were closing in, and their reinforcements were getting closer with every passing second. Ava turned back, looking at Graves and Samantha. "Go! Get to the chopper!" Graves hesitated, but only for a moment. "We're not leaving you behind." Ava's eyes hardened. "That's an order. Get to the chopper now." Without another word, Graves nodded, pushing Samantha ahead of him as they sprinted toward the waiting helicopter. Ava watched them go, her hand tightening around her weapon. She knew this was it, the moment where everything changed. She had fought for years to stay hidden, to bury the past. But now, her past was coming for her with a vengeance. As she turned to face the enemy, a calmness settled over her. She wasn't going to let anyone else die because of her. She had made it this far, and she was going to fight until her last breath. The first mercenary appeared from behind a tree, his weapon raised. Ava fired first. One shot, one kill. The second mercenary came into view, but Ava was faster. She hit her target, sending him sprawling into the dirt. The third mercenary didn't even get the chance to react. But there were more. So many more. Ava's heart pounded as she continued to fire, every shot precise, every movement calculated. She wasn't going down without a fight. She had been a weapon for so long, and now she would be the one to decide when it ended. The sound of more vehicles reached her ears, but it didn't matter anymore. She had done what she came here to do. Now it was time to get the rest of them out. The world around Ava seemed to slow down. The harsh sounds of gunfire, the pounding of her heart in her ears, the rush of adrenaline flooding her veins, they all blurred together into a single focused point. She was no longer fighting for survival alone. This was something far bigger than her, something far more important. The others had to make it out, no matter the cost. Ava's rifle hummed with precision as she fired again, her target falling to the ground without a sound. Another mercenary appeared to her left, moving quickly toward her. But Ava was faster. She turned, her rifle up, and fired 2 shots in quick succession. The mercenary's body jerked back, collapsing to the dirt, as though the world around him had ceased to matter the moment he stepped in her line of sight. Still more came. Figures emerged from the shadows, flanking her on all sides. But Ava remained a ghost, moving through the trees, taking them out one by one with cold efficiency. She had done this before, hundreds of times, but now it felt different. Her body moved automatically, every shot, every movement, part of a deadly dance. She wasn't just fighting to survive. She was protecting the people who had chosen to stand with her. The distant whir of the helicopter's blades grew louder, cutting through the air like a promise. But Ava knew they couldn't stay out in the open for long. They had no cover, no way to fend off the growing number of mercenaries closing in on them. The air was thick with tension, every breath drawing her deeper into the war she had been trying to escape for years. The forest around her had become a battleground, and there was no way out except through. Graves and Samantha were ahead, running toward the extraction point, but Ava wasn't finished. She wasn't going to leave them behind. She had to hold the line, give them enough time to reach the helicopter, and pray that reinforcements would come soon. Another round of shots rang out, this time from a position farther to her right. Ava swung her rifle in that direction, spotting two more mercenaries try to flank her. They were good, too good, but Ava had seen better. She ducked behind a fallen tree, using the cover to her advantage. The mercenaries fired in bursts, but she had already calculated their movements. It was only a matter of time before they came into view. Her breath was steady, her hands steady, even as the sounds of gunfire rang louder. Her eyes tracked the movements of the mercenaries, predicting their next steps. She waited for the perfect moment to strike. And then it came. Ava leapt from behind the cover, her rifle kicking up as she fired in quick succession. The first mercenary dropped, his body hitting the ground with a sickening thud. The second was faster, but Ava was already moving. She dropped to the ground, rolled, and came up on her feet behind him. One quick shot, and he was down. The forest fell silent once again, save for the sound of her breathing. But Ava knew it wouldn't last long. More were coming, and she had to be ready. She moved quickly, darting between trees, staying low to the ground, listening for the telltale signs of approaching enemies. Her muscles screamed from the exertion, but she pushed through, her mind focused entirely on a mission. She had to get them out. She had to make sure that when the helicopter arrived, everyone would be on it and safe. The distant sound of more engines reached her ears, and Ava knew the mercenaries weren't the only ones closing in. She could hear the hum of the convoy, and she knew the reinforcements were just moments away from surrounding them. Graves and Samantha were already near the helicopter. Ava could see their silhouettes against the sky, moving quickly toward the waiting bird. She could hear their voices shouting over the sound of the helicopter's blades, but the noise was too loud to make out their words. They were almost there, but Ava had to hold the line for just a little longer. She fired again, taking out another mercenary who had ventured too far ahead. His body crumpled to the ground, but Ava didn't stop to watch. She moved quickly and efficiently, making her way back toward the extraction point. She could see the helicopter now, close enough to feel the wind from the blades pushing against her face. Her legs burned with exhaustion, but she pushed herself forward, determined not to fail them. Just as she reached the clearing, a figure emerged from the trees. Ava's hand went to her weapon instinctively, but she stopped when she saw the man. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with a scar running down the left side of his face. Victor Kane himself. "Did you really think you could escape me?" Kane's voice was cold, mocking, his words carried on the wind like a dark promise. "You've been a ghost for far too long, Ava. It's time to end this." Ava's fingers tightened on the trigger, but she didn't shoot. Not yet. Instead, she took a step forward, her eyes never leaving Kane's. She had known this moment would come, but it still didn't feel real. He was here, face to face, and she wasn't going to let him win. "You don't get to make the rules anymore," Ava said, her voice low and steady, but there was fire behind it. "This ends now." Kane's lips twisted into a smile, and for a moment, it felt like the world had frozen. The noise of the helicopter, the sound of the mercenaries closing in, all faded away as Ava focused entirely on him. This was the man who had destroyed her life, the one who had made her a weapon, who had forced her into hiding. But now, she wasn't hiding. She wasn't afraid anymore. "I don't think you understand, Ava," Kane said, his hand drifting toward his sidearm. "You're out of options. There's nowhere left for you to run." Before Ava could respond, the sound of an explosion rocked the forest, and the ground beneath them trembled. Kane's smirk faded as he turned toward the blast, and in that split second of distraction, Ava fired. The shot rang out in the silence, hitting Kane square in the chest. His body jerked back, and he fell to the ground with a sickening thud. Ava didn't wait to see if he was dead. She didn't care. What mattered now was getting everyone out. She turned, sprinting toward the helicopter, where Graves and Samantha were already inside, the engines roaring to life. The blades whipped the air around her as she leapt into the open side door, just as the helicopter began to lift off the ground. The mercenaries were still in pursuit, but they were too far behind. They had won. Ava exhaled, the weight of what had just happened settling in. She had faced down the ghosts of her past, and they had tried to drag her down. But she had survived. She had fought back. And now, with Kane out of the picture, she could finally begin to move on. As the helicopter soared into the sky, leaving Fort Solace and the mercenaries behind, Ava allowed herself a brief moment of peace. The past hadn't just been a battle, it had been a war. And she had won. But she knew the fight was never truly over. There would always be shadows, always be those who would try to bring her down. But Ava Daniels was done running. She was ready for whatever came next. The helicopter sliced through the sky, the roaring blades cutting through the thick air as Ava stared out into the distance. Her eyes weren't focused on the scenery, though. She was lost in thought. The forest below them was rapidly becoming a blur, the feeling of freedom that came with escaping Kane's grip slowly settling in her bones. But there was something else, something that tugged at her chest, something she couldn't quite shake off. Even now, as they soared through the clouds, she felt the weight of the world on her shoulders. They had won this battle, but the war? That was still far from over. Victor Kane might be dead, but his influence, his shadow, loomed large. Ava had known this moment would come, knew that she would have to face him one day. But nothing could have prepared her for the sudden shift in her life, the overwhelming knowledge that everything she had fought for, everything she had done, had led her to this moment. The helicopter dipped, its descent steady as it approached their extraction point, an isolated safe house deep within an abandoned military compound. Ava's heart rate quickened, but it wasn't out of fear. It was anticipation. This was their new home, a place where they could regroup, where they could figure out what came next. Graves glanced over at her, his expression unreadable. He had been silent for most of the journey, his eyes scanning the sky as they flew, his mind no doubt working just as hers was. He had seen this through, fought with her through the worst of it, and though he didn't show it, Ava could tell it had taken a toll on him too. "Do you think it's over?" Graves asked, his voice low. Ava didn't look at him at first, her gaze fixed on the horizon. "I don't think anything is ever truly over," she said softly, her words carrying the weight of years spent in the shadows. "Kane's death doesn't change anything. There are still people out there who won't let us rest." "Then what's the plan?" Samantha asked from across the cabin, her voice steady but sharp, always alert. "What do we do now?" Ava exhaled a long, slow breath, her eyes flicking to the others. "We rebuild. We take back control. We figure out who's still pulling the strings. But first we rest. We've earned it." The safe house was just ahead, nestled in the heart of an isolated compound. It was an old military installation, long abandoned but still standing, quiet and hidden from the rest of the world. The helicopter touched down on the helipad with a low hum, the engines sputtering down as the aircraft came to a halt. The team disembarked quickly, moving toward the interior of the compound. Ava led the way, her boots clicking against the cracked concrete, her mind working in overdrive. She had already made plans, contingencies in case this day came, and now it was time to put them into action. Inside, the compound was dark, the air stale with dust and the faint scent of old machinery. The windows were boarded up, the lights dim, but it was secure. It was home for now. Ava's eyes scanned the room, taking in the layout, memorizing the exits, the rooms, the corners. They had to be ready for anything. She wasn't going to let her guard down. "Set up in the back room," Ava ordered. "We'll keep watching shifts." Graves nodded, already moving toward the corridor leading deeper into the building. Samantha followed, her pace swift, her mind already working on the security perimeter. They knew the drill. Ava stood by the door, her fingers brushing the cool metal of her rifle, as she took a moment to think. She had done it. She had survived. They had survived. But now the true test began. The moment they stopped moving, the moment they settled into this safe house, the world would change. It was inevitable. Someone would come looking for them. She glanced at the others, still moving swiftly to set up their station. Ava didn't allow herself to relax. She couldn't afford to. Not yet. There was still too much left to do. Too many unanswered questions. After a few minutes, Ava joined the rest of the team in the back room, a small space that had once served as a communications hub for the military base. It was now their control center. A large table sat in the middle, surrounded by old monitors, radio equipment, and maps of the surrounding area. Ava immediately got to work, flipping through the papers, making sure they were ready for the next phase. Graves stood by the door, keeping an eye on the hall. Samantha was already setting up a radio to try and tap into any communications that might give them a clue as to who was still after them. Ava studied the map on the wall. We're going to need to reach out to the underground network. I've got a few contacts left. We'll need their help to track down the mercenary groups still hunting us. I thought we were done with them, Samantha said, her voice tinged with disbelief. I thought we were clear of this after Kane's death. Ava shook her head. Kane was just a figurehead. There's still too many players out there in the shadows. We need to hit them where it hurts. The network. The funding. If we go after them, we can finally end this. For good. Graves shifted his weight, considering her words. You're not going to rest until it's over, are you? Ava met his gaze, a flicker of something dark in her eyes. We can't. Not until everyone involved is taken down. And until I know who's pulling the strings behind Kane. We have to finish this. The sound of a distant explosion rumbled in the distance, faint but unmistakable. Ava's head snapped up. The air in the room shifted. It wasn't just a random blast. This was a message. They found us. Graves muttered, his voice grim. Ava moved toward the radio equipment, her hands steady as she dialed in frequencies, trying to get a read on what was going on. The explosion had been close enough to shake the compound. It wasn't over. We need to get back on the move, Ava said, her voice calm but urgent. If they're already making their move, we don't have much time. Samantha finished connecting the radio, her eyes narrowing as she listened to the static. There's chatter. They're trying to pinpoint our location. We need to get out of here before they can lock us down. Ava didn't hesitate. She grabbed her gear, motioning for the others to do the same. Let's move out. We don't have time to waste. Graves and Samantha grabbed their packs, following Ava as they moved toward the exit. The team had barely settled into the safe house, and now the ghosts of their past were coming for them once more. The war wasn't over. The air was thick with tension as Ava and her team moved quickly through the abandoned compound, their boots echoing against the cold concrete floors. The dim light from the flickering bulbs overhead cast long shadows, making the building feel even more like a tomb than it already was. The safe house that had offered a moment of refuge now felt like a trap, a temporary illusion of safety that was quickly dissolving into chaos. Move fast, stay sharp, Ava said, her voice a low whisper as she scanned their surroundings. Her mind raced, trying to process the information coming in from every direction. The explosion they had heard earlier was no accident. The enemy was getting closer, and it was only a matter of time before they were surrounded. They had been tracked, and now the fight was about to get even more personal. Graves, always the stoic one, didn't need to be told twice. He kept pace with Ava, his sharp eyes scanning every corner, every shadow, as they moved through the compound. Samantha followed behind, her steps quick but measured, her rifle at the ready. She was always alert, always calculating their next move. But Ava knew there was something different about her now. The weight of what they had just been through was pressing on all of them, and even the calmest among them couldn't escape the tension that was mounting. They reached the front gate of the compound, where the only exit was guarded by a thick chain-link fence. Ava's eyes narrowed as she surveyed the area. The trees surrounding the compound were dense, but there were no guarantees they wouldn't be seen once they moved out into the open. We need to get to the old highway, Ava said, her voice firm. It's the quickest way to get to our contact. We can't afford to stay here any longer. Graves gave a quick nod, the unspoken understanding between them evident. He knew the plan. He trusted her judgment. But as they turned to make their way toward the perimeter, the sound of a helicopter reached them. The low hum of the blades grew louder by the second, and Ava's heart skipped a beat. They hadn't been spotted yet. It was just a matter of time before the mercenaries realized they were gone. And when they did, they'd send in everything they had. "Get down," Ava barked, immediately pulling the team into cover behind a rusted vehicle near the back of the compound. The helicopter hovered overhead, its rotors churning the air. Ava's mind was racing, calculating the angle of their flight, trying to figure out where it would land, and how much time they had before they would be discovered. But there was no time. The enemy was here. The question wasn't if they were going to be found. It was when. She glanced over at Graves and Samantha. Graves was already adjusting his gear, checking his weapon. Samantha was focused, her eyes scanning the helicopter's movements. Ava could see the tension in her jaw, the same tension Ava felt in her own bones. They were running out of options, and fast. "We need to move now," Ava said, her voice low but urgent. "That helicopter is here for a reason. They're not just dropping in for a casual visit." Samantha nodded, slipping out from behind cover. She moved quickly, silently, as if every step could be their last. Ava followed, keeping her movements quick but precise. They had no choice now. They had to make it to the highway, and from there, hope they could contact someone who could help them. Graves was right behind them, his eyes still fixed on the helicopter above. "Stay low," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "They're looking for us." Ava's mind was spinning, trying to process everything that was happening, but there was no time for hesitation. They had to keep moving, had to keep ahead of the mercenaries that were closing in. They reached the edge of the compound, and Ava's eyes scanned the horizon. The forest was dense, but they had a clear shot at the highway if they could make it through the woods without being seen. Her pulse quickened, the stakes higher than ever. Every step felt like a countdown, each one closer to the moment when they would either escape or face the consequences of their past. Just as they began to move toward the trees, the helicopter made a sharp turn, its searchlight cutting through the darkening sky. Ava froze, her heart pounding in her chest as the beam of light swept across the area. It wasn't just searching for them, it was marking them. "We gotta go now," Ava shouted, her voice urgent. They sprinted for cover, diving into the thick underbrush just as the helicopter passed overhead. Ava didn't dare look back, but she could hear the sound of the rotors growing louder, signaling the aircraft's turn. The mercenaries had to know by now. They had been found. Ava's breathing was quick, shallow, as she pushed herself harder, faster. The woods felt endless, the trees and bushes thick enough to slow them down, but they couldn't afford to stop. She could hear the others behind her, their breath matching the rhythm of her own as they pushed forward, making their way through the woods, praying they could make it to the highway before they were caught. The path was rough, the ground uneven, but Ava's eyes never left the path ahead. She could feel the presence of the mercenaries closing in, and it was only a matter of time before they would be in pursuit. She could hear the faint crack of twigs snapping behind them, the faint rustle of leaves as someone moved through the forest. The enemy was on their heels. And then, as if fate had decided to intervene, the sound of gunfire rang out, and Ava's heart stopped. Graves collapsed to the ground, a sharp cry escaping his lips as he fell. Ava's mind went into overdrive. She didn't hesitate. She turned, sprinting back toward him. "No!" Samantha shouted, but Ava was already at Graves' side, her hand on his shoulder, her eyes scanning the wound. A bullet had hit him in the side, and blood was seeping through his shirt, staining the dirt beneath him. "We need to move," Ava said urgently, her voice trembling for the first time since this began. "We can't stay here." But Graves, his face pale and his breath shallow, shook his head weakly. "Go," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "You have to finish it. Finish what we started." Ava felt her throat tighten. She couldn't leave him. Not like this. Not after everything they had been through together. But she knew what had to be done. She knew they couldn't afford to waste any more time. "Hang on," Ava said, trying to steady his body as she checked for more injuries. She felt his pulse slowing, and her heart clenched in her chest. "We'll get you out of here." But it was too late. Graves' eyes fluttered, and he was gone. Samantha dropped to her knees beside them, tears streaming down her face. "Graves!" she whispered, her voice cracking. Ava clenched her fists, her emotions swirling. But there was no time to mourn. Not now. They couldn't afford the luxury of grief. The mercenaries were still coming, and Ava had to finish what she started. She had to make sure this ended, once and for all. She looked at Samantha, her eyes hardening with resolve. "We'll make them pay for this," she said, her voice low, steady, and filled with fury. "We'll make sure they never hurt anyone again." Samantha nodded, wiping her tears away. "We're not done yet." Ava stood, wiping the blood from her hands, and then she turned and moved forward into the trees, determined to carry on. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. The forest was now Ava's only ally, its thick canopy of trees offering some semblance of protection from the helicopter above. But the wind, sharp and biting, carried the scent of danger with it. Ava pushed through the dense undergrowth, her body heavy with grief, but her mind laser-focused on the task at hand. The death of Graves still lingered in her chest, but she couldn't allow herself to feel it. Not yet. The mercenaries were closing in, and if she didn't act quickly, she would be just another casualty of this relentless war. Samantha kept pace with her, the sound of her breathing ragged but steady. The girl was strong, resilient, but Ava could see the toll this mission had taken on her. The loss of Graves was as hard on Samantha as it was on her. They had been a team, and now, with one of their own gone, the weight of their mission grew heavier. But there was no room for doubt. Ava couldn't let herself falter. Not now. "How much further?" Samantha asked, her voice strained as she glanced over her shoulder. They were still a few miles from the highway, and the helicopter above continued its search. Ava's voice was steady, betraying none of the tension bubbling just beneath the surface. "Not far. We just have to keep moving." Every muscle in Ava's body burned from the exertion, the physical toll of the day's events pushing her to her limits. But there was no time for weakness. There was no time to stop. The thought of what had happened to Graves, what they had lost, was driving her now. The sense of loss would have to wait. The mission was still in play, and she was determined to make sure they all made it out of this alive, especially Samantha. Ava wouldn't let Graves' death be in vain. They pushed on, the path growing steeper as they neared the edge of the forest. Ava could hear the faint sounds of the convoy moving in the distance, but the dense trees muffled their footsteps. That was their only hope. If they could get to the highway before the mercenaries realized where they were, they could make contact with their underground allies and finally get out of the kill zone. Minutes turned to hours as they moved quickly through the night, their senses heightened by the sounds of the world around them. Ava's eyes were constantly scanning the tree line for movement, her body tense with the anticipation of an attack. She could feel the mercenaries closing in, the scent of danger thickening in the air with every step they took. And yet, there was an odd calmness in the way she moved. The same calmness she had adopted in the field when the stakes were high, when death was just a breath away. The sounds of distant footsteps grew louder, and Ava's heart skipped a beat. She stopped, her body frozen as she listened. The convoy was getting closer. They had to make it to the highway now, or they would be trapped. She glanced at Samantha, her eyes meeting hers with a silent understanding. "We move in two," Ava whispered, her voice low and urgent. "We can't afford to wait any longer." Samantha nodded, her face pale but resolute. "Two." Ava took a deep breath, checking the map in her pocket one final time. They were just moments away from the clearing that led to the highway. It would be their only escape, their only chance. If they could get there without being spotted, they could contact the underground network, and everything they had fought for would finally make sense. They would be free. Suddenly, a crackling noise interrupted the silence of the forest. Ava's instincts kicked in before she could process it. Her rifle was up, aimed at the clearing, her finger on the trigger. But it was too late to make a move, too late to fight. They had been found. Gunfire erupted in the air, shattering the night's silence. Ava dove to the ground, pulling Samantha down with her as bullets whizzed through the trees, their sharp staccato beat echoing through the forest. Ava's heart pounded in her chest, her muscles screaming as she rolled, trying to find cover in the thick underbrush. The sound of footsteps and shouts grew louder, the mercenaries closing in, knowing they had finally cornered their prey. "Get to the highway," Ava shouted, her voice cutting through the chaos. She could see the clearing ahead of them, the faint outline of the road just beyond the trees. But the mercenaries were already making their move, setting up positions to trap them before they could get away. Ava could hear the hum of more helicopters in the distance, a second wave of reinforcements. Samantha looked at Ava, fear flashing in her eyes, but Ava didn't hesitate. "Move now," she barked. They sprinted toward the clearing, each step a battle as the mercenaries pursued them. Ava's heart hammered in her chest, her mind calculating the best possible route, trying to anticipate where the next attack might come from. They had no time to stop, no time to look back. If they didn't reach the highway, they would die here. Ava could see the road now, just ahead. The old highway, still intact, stretched out before them like a lifeline. But the mercenaries were close, too close. Ava's mind raced as she formulated her plan. They would never make it to the road unless she gave them an opening. She pulled a grenade from her belt and tossed it behind her, the explosion deafening as it rocked the earth beneath their feet. The mercenaries hesitated for just a moment, the blast catching them off guard. Ava seized the opportunity, grabbing Samantha's arm and pulling her toward the road. "Go, go, go," Ava urged, her voice sharp with urgency. They reached the road just as another helicopter flew overhead, its searchlight blinding them for a moment. Ava didn't wait to see if the mercenaries were behind them. She grabbed the comms device in her pocket and sent a signal to the underground network. It was their only chance. She had no idea if they would respond, but it was their best shot. A moment later, static filled the air, followed by a crackling voice. "This is command. We got you covered. Hang tight. Extraction is en route." Ava let out a breath she didn't realize she had been holding. They weren't alone anymore. The cavalry was coming. But even as the feeling of relief started to wash over her, Ava's mind was still racing. She had gotten them this far, but they weren't out of danger yet. The mercenaries were relentless, and they would stop at nothing to finish what they started. Ava turned to Samantha, her voice hardening with resolve. "Get ready. They're coming for us." Samantha's eyes met hers, and for the first time since the chaos had begun, Ava saw the quiet determination in the younger woman's gaze. "We'll fight. We won't let them win." Ava nodded. She didn't need to say anything more. They had come this far together, and they would finish it together. The sound of another helicopter filled the air, and this time, it wasn't an enemy aircraft. Ava turned to see their extraction team, the sleek black chopper descending toward them. The landing gear hit the dirt with a thud, and the side door opened. This was it. This was the moment they had fought for. Ava grabbed Samantha's hand and pulled her toward the helicopter, their last dash for freedom. As they boarded, Ava glanced back one last time at the forest, the scene of so many battles, so many memories, so much loss. But now it was time to leave it behind. As the helicopter's doors slammed shut, Ava felt the familiar rush of relief wash over her. The fight wasn't over, but for the first time in a long while, it felt like they had won.